Did you know that every 25 seconds someone in America is arrested for drug-related charges? Or that 1/5 of the incarcerated population is serving time for drug charges? This is how it's been ever since 1951, when all drugs became punishable with maximum penalties. Ever since then, the number of drug users has only increased, and from the years 1968 to 2019, there's been over 1 million drug-related deaths. And last year, there were 271 deaths per day due to drug usage. There's no doubt that drugs are a problem in America, but the route in which we are taking to outlaw them has not helped. It has only made the problem worse and helps the traffickers profit. Today, we're going to be looking at our three main points are going to be the history of the war on drugs, the money spent versus the reward, and who's winning. Moving into the history, it's hard to see where a war like this may have begun because it's unlike any war that we've ever seen before. It started in the early 1800s with a German pharmacist, and he discovered morphine derived from opium. Shortly after, morphine was used in wars all across the world, and shortly after the American Civil War, there were about 400,000 addicted soldiers coming home. Once all the addictive side effects were discovered, in 1951, all drugs became illegal and punishable with maximum penalties, ranking from marijuana all the way to heroin. We're in the same category, maximum penalties across the board. This act was called the Boggs Act, and ever since then, it was a major turning point in the war because the number of drug users increases exponentially within the next 10 years. With the history known, we see the number of drug users increase in the next 10 years. In the early 1960s, the number of heroin users across the country were about 40,000, and then 1961 hit and it jumped to around 500,000 people using across the country. And with all that, America was sinking more and more money into the war, and on average, we spend about $51 billion per year on the war on drugs. And since over the past 50 years, we've spent about $1 trillion on the war on drugs in total. With those numbers, you would expect the number of users to decrease, but right now we are still at an all-time high opiate crisis, and cocaine usage is still ranked at an epidemic stage. The more we outlaw them, the more the drugs get used, and makes the traffickers more profit. So with all the money spent and seeing that the budget really isn't helping the case, we see that most of the drug charges in America that have so many people locked up are on the small, petty amounts of drugs, when the people making the mass amounts of money are cartel leaders and members on that we can't even arrest them. The harder that we make these drugs to get, the more money the producer makes because of the simple principle of supply and demand. When the drugs are harder to get, it takes more to get them here, making the price increase. If the drugs were cheaper and they weren't outlawed, they would be flooded in the streets and the price would plummet, making the cartels very little money. Now, looking back, we looked at the history, the money spent versus the reward, and who's winning. We can see that money has not helped in the war on drugs. We see that the number of users has increased with the more money we spend. The more money we spend is the more money that the cartels make. We have been punishing people too long for drugs instead of helping them. If we could get people to just get off of them without getting out of jail and they go back and just do more drugs, it would help a lot. So in the end, we got to decide who has won the war on drugs, and it is very clearly not us. Thank you.